Hello again, I'm back with another Nikon Z6 and Z7 video. This one I'm going to talk about new firmware 3 and how to set up autofocus tracking and back button autofocus. So you can utilize the new improved tracking feature, which is similar to the 3D tracking found in Nikon's DSLRs. It's a different system than 3D tracking. Some people are calling it that, but it's technically not the same as their 3D tracking. So I'm just going to run through Nikon Firmware 3 for the Z6 and Z7. Came out a few days ago. I have not had a chance to dig into it too far. I've installed it and set it up. I've used it around the house, like to track my little Lula over here and see how animal face detection works on her. I'm going to dig into that a lot more, and I'll get back to you once I've had a chance to really put it through its paces with wildlife as well, and with shooting my kids. Hopefully it works awesome. I'm very hopeful. The reports, initial preliminary stuff that I'm seeing looks really positive. So I'm super psyched that Nikon has continued to develop this over the last 16 months with firmware updates, and this latest one, Firmware 3, sounds like it's a really good potential for some major improvements. So I'm crossing my fingers, and I hope that that's the case. Right out of the gate, I will mention two things about Firmware 3 that I still wish Nikon would address, a couple of issues. One of which is the ability to assign different autofocus modes and AF on to other buttons, which we can do on the D500, the D5, and the D850. Like, for instance, I like to use my AF on button as back button autofocus, but then the little thumbstick button there, I like to program a separate autofocus. I like to program a single point. Like if I'm using tracking or a wide area or a dynamic area up here, I always like to have a single point that I can really like get through some branches or something to peg something very difficult to locate in the forest, a fine point, just without switching autofocus modes, but I have this program to just be AF on with a different mode. I can do that on all the DSLRs that I use, but I still can't do it, nobody can, on a Z6 or a Z7. So that's one thing that I'd love to see them improve next time. And the other thing I'd like to see them do is to make the tracking autofocus a completely separate autofocus mode. Right now, you have to set it to auto area AF, which utilizes the whole screen, and then you have to then use a separate button to turn on the actual tracking box. And so it's an extra step. It's extra cumbersome to actually use the tracking. So I'll show you exactly how that works here in a minute, but I would love to see the tracking as a completely separate autofocus mode, and then I could program it, to that button and have, a different mode, a single point or a dynamic mode here, and then automatically just to go to tracking, boom, right like that. The auto mode to me is pretty useless for wildlife photography because you're letting the camera decide what to focus on, and the camera just doesn't usually do well in those situations where you've got an animal amongst a forest or something. The camera has a really hard time trying to decide what you want to focus on. So having it in that auto area autofocus mode is kind of useless to me as a wildlife photographer. It works great for when I'm photographing my kids, but I'd love to see those separated out and have two different modes, one being a tracking mode and one being the auto area AF. So hopefully Nikon will continue to listen to users and make some of those changes in firmware to make it more like the DSLRs we're used to using, and give us those flexibility that I like, and I know some other people like as well. So, but anyway, kudos to Nikon for putting out another big firmware update here on the Z6 and the Z7. I'm psyched to give it a try, and I'm hopeful that we're finally going to have a usable tracking system and a way more functional continuous autofocus performance out of these cameras. So with that said, I'm going to switch over to show you the back of the camera and how to set this up in the menu. And that's it. So check this out, set it up, and try it for yourself, and let me know what you think, how it's working for you, okay? All right, on to the back of the camera here. Okay, so here we are with the Nikon Z7. Now I don't have one of those fancy Atomos things that shows you the exact screen, so we're just looking at the rear LCD here, and we have to do a couple of things here. First we have to set up that back button autofocus. So to do that we have to do a couple of things. First one is I'm going to go into the menu settings here. I'm going to go into autofocus, custom settings, A7. Go to AF activation. This is by default up here, which means you're going to be focusing with the shutter button up here or with back button AF on over here. We don't want the shutter button up here, so we're going to go to AF on only, and I'm going to enable autofocus release as well. Okay, so that AF activation is off. That's what we want. And then I am going to also put that in my menu down here, so I have quick access to it. So if I ever want to have the shutter button actual autofocus for me, and I do this a fair amount when I'm photographing kids and I'm using eye autofocus and just kind of shooting from the hip and doing like sneak attacks on them where they don't necessarily see me taking photos. There it is, AF activation. Okay, so then anyway, that's part one, A7, AF activation off. Then we're going to go for A4, auto area AF. You can turn this off if you don't want to use any of the automatic modes. When I'm shooting my kids, I like to have it here on the face and eye detection, and that way it'll detect their face. I'm testing this around the house with my dogs. I haven't used it on actual wildlife yet. Honestly, I don't have a whole lot of hope that it'll work great for wildlife, but I'm sure going to test it, and I'll let you know what I find out. And you can turn that off as well. So I'm going to leave that on for now. And also put that in my menu down here, which is just a few of the quick settings that I use, so I can get into that real quick and change it to whatever I want. Okay. And then I'm going to do my custom controls. So this is part of the, so back button autofocus is set up now here, where I have now the shutter button up here isn't doing any kind of focusing, just the back button now is setting my focus, okay? Now we get to set up the custom controls that will allow us to use the tracking. So we're going to go into custom settings and controls. In F, I'm going to be looking for F2, custom control assignment. Nikon will allow you to use either of your function buttons, which are these two buttons in here. It's kind of dark in there, but there's a function 1 and a function 2 button. You can set those up to be your tracking initiation. So I'm going to set up function 2 to be mine. So there, function 1 I have set to an autofocus lock, and then you can see there function 2 is the lower one. I'm going to get my cursor here on function 2 and then set that up to be subject tracking. Okay, so when I have that subject tracking set up, now I need to tap that. And then, so now I'll show you how to use it. It's quite simple. As I mentioned in the intro there, I think Nikon could make it a separate unit, which would make it even easier to use. So right now, you see the red squares. This is the camera's deciding what to focus on. The way we have to now use subject tracking is this function button up on the front of the camera up here. I'm going to tap that and you'll see the little tracking box appear. So now that I've got the little tracking box up on the screen there, I can move it around with the little joystick or with the D-pad, whatever. I can put it wherever I want. I can leave it in the center, whatever I want to do with it there. It's not doing anything yet because I'm not touching the AF on button here. So when it's time I want to start tracking something, I put the box on what I want to track and then I hit AF on. And now you see it turned into a yellow box, and see how it's following my subject? So it will now track. I can focus and recompose here, and if I'm moving in and out, if that subject's moving, it will continue to track it. So it's got great potential here for focus and recompose while something's moving, forward or back or sideways. This has the power to be really, really helpful in photography. Sony has a very similar system that is fantastic. I'm hopeful that Nikon's will be as good. Time will tell. But then when you're done tracking it, you just let go of the AF on button. Then you're just back to that square again. You're not tracking anything. If you want to then pick it back up, you just put it on there, initiate AF on, you're good to go. If you want to pick something else, this is going to have a hard time because it's such a flat, nondescript thing. You can see it's tracking reasonably well there. But you can track whatever you want. Move it around, come forward, come back, whatever. You can track it to the bottom of the screen, to the top of the screen, right, left, whatever. And then when you're done, you just release the screen. You can move this thing around, initiate another set of tracking here, boom, boom, up, down, anywhere you go, focus and recompose. It's going to follow that around for you. You can see it works pretty well. It's nice and sticky there. And then when you're done, now that box is still up, and then my function 2 button is my kind of tracking, subject tracking mode off and on. If I touch that again, boom, that box goes away. And now the camera is trying to decide what to focus on. And in this case, it's not picking up the elephant. So if I wanted to pick up the elephant, I hit F2 again, brings up my box, boom, just like that. Now, as I mentioned, I would prefer to have just this be its own separate mode, so I don't have to touch this button to turn it off and on. I would just want to have this tracking box up all the time, make it active with the AF on button, and have a nice day, and not have to deal with hitting the function 2 button to turn it off and on. So that's not the case right now, but maybe in a future update, Nikon will allow us to do that. So anyway, get out there and give this thing a try. I think I'm very hopeful that it'll work great. See you later. Bye. Okay, so there it is to set it up and get back button autofocus and the autofocus tracking mode working. Hope it works out for you. Leave a comment below. Let me know what you think. Hopefully it's working great for you. Okay? Thanks for watching. Take care. I'll see you on the next video. Later.